Alrighty, y'all ready to get very scary and deal with rats and swamp fungus and stuff like that? I thought so. M.L. Rio, this book is a Gothic novella. It's called Graveyard Shift. It is from Flatiron Books. Some of you may be familiar with her previous book, If We Were Villains, which is something of a publishing phenomenon. When it first came out, it was crickets dead in the water, and then it became this international bestseller. Her follow-up is Graveyard Shift. It's 100 pages, like I said, a novella, about 5 people with terrible insomnia, and they're all in the college community, and the only place to grab a smoke, because you can't smoke on campus, is, well, the cemetery. So they meet there and talk about their insomnia and smoke cigarettes and get into all kind of really morbid adventures. It is really wonderful. Y'all please welcome M.L. Rio. All right, it's not swamp fungus. What am I thinking of? What's the fungus in here among us?
Zombie fungus, I think.
Zombie fungus. That's right. You opened for them a few times in bars up in Knoxville, Swampy Fungus. Yeah. You yourself, ML, have insomnia. You were telling me the 5 main characters that's their bind. They had really terrible insomnia. If you don't mind, you share with us. You did in the book and in some of your press. I read you've had it all your life.
Pretty much, yeah. I was a bad sleeper from a very young age, which is such a weird thing to say, like you're bad at sleeping, which is a really basic human function. It's like saying you're bad at breathing. But I had night terrors as a little kid, and by the time I was, 9 or 10, it wasn't really improving, and my parents had tried all the sleep training, and then I think they went, well, we gotta sleep, so, she'll figure it out.
And let you try to figure it out. And you've tried all the remedies we might think of, and the characters, particularly Edie, I believe in the book, has also tried many remedies. What gave you the idea for this? I said cemetery. It's an abandoned graveyard. There really was such a place where you went to school, the University of North Carolina, correct?
That's right, yeah. It's not actually abandoned at UNC. You have to take a little bit of license for fiction, but the old Chapel Hill Cemetery was right behind my dorm when I was a freshman, the 1 year I lived in the dorms. And it was a place that I was always kind of intrigued by. It was kind of right between North Campus, where the humanities usually are, and South Campus, where the medical school is. And it was an interesting way station between the two, because I think a graveyard is a place where, the kind of scientific, biological side of death and the more humanitarian side of death sort of intersect. And because I was often up late at night when nobody else was, I would sometimes go wandering through the graveyard in my pajamas like a lunatic, and I would occasionally see people there, and I was so intrigued, like what is this group of people doing here in the middle of the night? And it turned out that because our campus had this policy that you couldn't smoke within 100 feet of any campus building, people had figured out that there were about 2 places on campus where you could smoke, and one was the flagpole in the North Quad, so you'd always see a bunch of people kind of huddled around the flagpole and huffing and puffing. And the other place was the cemetery. You would find people out there late at night, mostly night shift workers, who were taking their smoke break kind of in among the headstones.
It just sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Yeah, it's like a springtime stroll in the park. I want to touch on your first book, which really was If We Were Villains, a novel also set on a college campus. That sort of seems to be your setting thus far. It's a great place for drama and so forth. But tell us how it came to be. I understand when it came out, it just dropped off the face of the earth, and you thought, well, maybe I'll try something else. And then, jackpot, what happened?
Yeah, it's very long. It's a long, strange trip, if you will. I wrote If We Were Villains when I was a senior in college, so I was quite young, and I was still at UNC at the time. And I'd written a bunch of books before that, but nothing that really felt like it was worth a reader's time. But I was also an actor, and I was mostly a Shakespearean actor. And finally, a light bulb kind of went on, and I went, oh. Well, why have you never written a book about this really strange, kind of closed, culty world of the Shakespearean theater? So I did that, and I did manage to sell the book, but then it came out, and I once heard another author who was debuting describe it as a firestorm of silence. There's a lot of hullabaloo around when the book first comes out, and then everybody just loses interest completely, including your own publisher. And this is not anomalous at all. This happens all the time in publishing. But I was about 25, and it was pretty soul-crushing to have my first book come out, and then after that, have a bunch of people say to me, yeah, you're probably not getting published again because the numbers just aren't there. So I did a pretty hard pivot to academia and went and got my master's in Shakespeare and eventually my PhD. And about halfway through my PhD program, we started to see the sales numbers swing up. And we didn't really know why. But I think what happened is it was during the pandemic. It was about 2020 when we started to see this change. And I think what happened is just that a lot of young people who were looking forward to going off to school or going back to school didn't get to do that because of COVID, and they sought out campus novels instead as like a vicarious version of that experience. So Villains just got kind of pulled along in the wake of enthusiasm for this genre. And so I'm just very lucky that the tables kind of turned in my favor.
How many countries or how many translations are we at now? You're at 19 or 20 or something?
Something like that. I don't know that I have the exact number. I think it's maybe 20 countries and 18 languages, something like that.
Yeah. Well, I happen to have the Google at the house, and I'm cutting edge. Don't even know. I got the YouTube too. Forget about it. 20 countries and 18 languages. You went from you'll never be published again to you're a global phenom, and here you are in Oxford, Mississippi. Bless you. All right. Yeah. Very quickly, we want you to read, but I do want to ask you about the story of this book being published, and you had some travails, including shattering your foot while this book, Graveyard Shift, was coming out. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I finished my PhD in May of 23, and at that point the book was selling pretty well, so everybody was going, where is the next novel? So I turned around to start writing another book pretty much immediately, and I was pretty deep in that when my publisher for the first book called and said, hey, by the way, we are interested in maybe doing a novella. Is that something you might like to try? And I really did. I had this idea of, I'd always wanted to write a story that took place in like 12 hours, like a whole story that took place in just one night. So because I'm a little bit crazy, I said, sure, let's do it while I'm writing this other book at the same time. I was living out of my car because I was doing research for that book on the road mostly. And then in the middle of all that, I shattered my calcaneus and my subtalar joint.
That's easy for you to say.
Yeah, shattered is never a word you want to hear from a doctor.
Right.
But yeah, so I spent the rest of that year with, both crutches under one arm and dragging my suitcase with the other hand. I was in an orthopedic boot for, I think, 6 months. Man. And writing 2 books at the same time. And
then you told me moving out of your home, out of your apartment or your house, you were moving out at the same time you're on crutches.
I was, yeah. I had just sold my house because I knew I was going to be kind of on the road for a couple of years, and we had our closing date, and then I broke my foot, and I said, okay, I'm going to find a way to move out of a 2-story house on crutches.
Wow.
Would not recommend.
Man. Well, you got to write all that up. That's quite a story. But nothing compared to Graveyard Shift. This is a perfect story for this time of year. Again, y'all, zombie fungus. Please, watch out for it. It's a thing. Let's hear some of this book. It is Graveyard Shift, M.L. Rio, y'all.
12:00 a.m. Edie. They met in the cemetery every night at midnight. Not on purpose exactly, but not quite by accident either. University policy prohibited smoking within 100 feet of any campus building. And on the west side of campus, where the borders between the medical school and the broader community were especially porous, the only place a person gasping for a cigarette could safely stand was in the unkempt graveyard behind the Church of St. Anthony the Anchorite. Most of the names on most of the gravestones had been scrubbed out by time or teenage vandals. The church itself had been boarded up and was so overgrown with vines and moss and mold that the "Danger, Keep Out" sign nailed across the doors was decidedly redundant. Since its designation as a local historic landmark, it was protected from the bulldozers and wrecking balls that had razed everything else south of Azalea Street to make way for more patients, more parking, more gift shops, and dining halls. While the medical school constructed, St. Anthony the Anchorite deconstructed, one brick, one beam at a time. Nobody in their right mind would loiter in its long shadow in the middle of the night, but nobody in their right mind still smoked these days anyway. So Edie Wu told herself as she trudged across campus from the offices of the Bell Tower Times. She was always the last to clock out, her grim duty as editor-in-chief to lash herself to the masthead, go down with the ship. But lately she didn't clock out so much as take 5, take a break, take a walk. Tell herself one cigarette a night was not a habit, just a way to take the edge off when she was, well, on edge. And when was she not? Yes, it was a student paper, but a 6-time Pacemaker award-winning student paper circulating to 10,000 readers. Her predecessor had graduated and gone on to The Nation, but still cast a long shadow across Edie's desk. Some nights she wished for catastrophe to strike, just so she'd have a big story to break, which only made her feel worse in the morning because she still had no story, but she did have a fresh black bruise on her conscience. The bigger problem was the lump. Since its first appearance 2 weeks ago, everything had felt hugely, horribly urgent. She pulled her coat a little closer and hurried toward the ramshackle shadow of the Anchorite, a rock-bound black mass rudely eclipsing the sickly sickle moon. She was huffing and puffing by the time she crested the hill and slipped through the gate, which refused to stay latched anymore. Like the "Keep Out" sign, the gate was redundant. Nobody wanted to huddle in a moldering churchyard after midnight because there was nowhere else to smoke, but huddle they did. Misery loved company and made strange bedfellows. 2 of the others had beaten her there. She knew them by their shadows. Tuck, with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders hunched, was always first. Beside him stood Hannah, who put her hood up at the first rustle of autumn and didn't take it down again until May. Oddly, though, they weren't talking. They stared down at the ground in stony imitation of the graveyard angels, without the blank, unblinking eyes or patchy beards of lichen. When they heard Edie's footsteps round the drew old obelisk, they looked up and she looked down and realized that what they were actually staring at was a hole in the ground. Edie stared too. The hell is that? Hannah took a long drag. The hell do you think? The hood cast her narrow face in shadow, blacked out both her eyes. Of the other anchorites, Edie liked her least. She turned to Tuck instead, already fumbling to light his second smoke. "Don't look at me," he said. "I don't know anything." "It wasn't here last night," Edie said. "Duh." Hannah let her mouth hang open, smoke spilling out. She lifted one foot and knocked the peak off the little mountain of dirt at the edge of the hole. Edie peered down into the darkness. Hairy, gnarled roots poked out of the damp earth and cobwebbed it with white threads of mycelia. Who was the last to leave? Ask the rector. Hannah steepled her hands in a mockery of prayer and bowed towards Tuck. He pinched the cigarette against his lips. "Me," he said. Not actually a rector in any official capacity, but he might as well have been. Always the first to arrive, always the last to leave. Edie sometimes wondered what he was avoiding. She had trouble checking the impulse to pry into everything. The lump throbbed reproachfully. It did that now, when her journalistic ambitions got the better of her. She knew she was probably imagining it, but that, like the many statistics arguing in favor of its being entirely benign, did not comfort her much. "Did you see anything weird?" "Is this your first time here?" Hannah said. "Everything about this place is weird." The Anchorite did seem oddly lost in time and space. It had stood on the same spot for 200 years while the town and the college exploded around it. On one side, a parking garage cast a murky orange light, as if the night outside had oxidized. Glaring red letters spelled out emergency in the black sky southward. The west wall opened into an alley behind the Calhoun Center for Behavioral Psychiatry, and the north wall followed a narrow road that eventually crossed paths with the modest nightlife flitting up and down Azalea Street. The light of the street lamps encroached only so far, held at bay by a wall of ivy that had filled in the gaps between the bars of the fence. Within its crooked boundaries, angels wept elegantly over headstones, while swinish gargoyles grinned and leered from their perches on either side of the church doors. Weeds grew without restraint. An oak tree, even older than the church, squatted in one corner, dropping acorns and orange leaves every October, until the branches were bare and jack-o'-lantern mushrooms took up residence among the roots. Some had sprouted already, glowing eerily in the dark.
Emil Rio, y'all. Graveyard Shift. It is from Flatiron Books, and ML will join us after the show. Sign copies. Visit with us some more. I bet we also have copies of If We Were Villains, her novel that really bounced back and kind of got her going. Great stuff with this Graveyard Shift. All right, Julie Williams, CMT, Country Music Television's Next Women of Country Music. And they have, I don't know, I guess a couple of dozen. They name a couple every year, and you're in the batch this year, is it? And that's quite an honor. You also play with the Black Opry, which is a fine group, also in Nashville. Is that a gig in Nashville? Yeah. You have a new album coming out called Tennessee Moon, and I've been listening to it today and yesterday, and it is just fine.
Thank you.
Congratulations. I hope we hear some of it right now. Y'all please welcome Julie Williams.
You told me from the first go that you're going, but a part of me believed you wouldn't leave. I drew poems out of words you never spoken. I heard a love songs in your footsteps on a fallen leaf, but you'd always leave. I was your blue moon, circling around you, chasing a golden sky as it fades to gray. Our paths would collide, those warm southern nights when you wanted them to. You were the sun, and I was just once in Tennessee moon, a Tennessee moon. I drove you to the river that August evening. Built you a boat in my own hands and I put you in. Watch you turn from a man to a stone to a rebel. Took a photo of that sunset in case I never saw you again. Will I see you again? Circling around you, chasing a golden sky as it fades to gray. Our paths would collide, those warm southern nights when you wanted them to. You were the sun, and I was just once in Tennessee moon. Heard you off climbing some other mountain, on some snowy peak on the far side of the globe. that you just end up cold and low. I was your blue moon, circling around you, chasing a golden sky as it fades to gray. I was your blue moon, circling around you, chasing a golden sky as it fades to gray. You were the sun, and I was just once. You were the sun, but now you burns up. But you're out of luck, 'cause I was just once in Tennessee. Tennessee.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, thank you. It is such an honor to be here. This is my first time ever playing in Mississippi, so it is just incredible to be here.